Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Amy Morris. Here are the stories we're following today.
Amy, France's benchmark stock market is down nearly 2%. The euro is trading at a one-month low. This comes after election results in Brussels. French President Emmanuel Macron has plunged his country into political uncertainty, dissolving the lower house of parliament and calling new legislative elections. That's after his party came a distant second to Marine Le Pen's far right in Sunday's European Parliament vote. Speaking to the nation after the polls closed, Macron said the National Assembly election is a chance to determine France's future.
This is a serious and weighty decision, but above all, it is an act of trust. Confidence in you, my dear compatriots, in the ability of the French people to make the just choice for themselves and for future generations.
That was French President Macron speaking through an interpreter. Now, his position as head of state won't be directly affected by the upcoming vote, but his ability to push through legislation, the power to choose a like-minded prime minister, and the credibility of his political project will all be on the line in an election that Sunday's results suggest he is likely to lose.
And Nathan, far-right parties also made gains elsewhere in Europe. In Germany, Chancellor Olaf Scholz's Social Democrats recorded their worst ever EU result, falling to third place behind the far-right Alternative for Germany and the center-right Christian Democrats. And in Italy, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's right-wing Brothers of Italy party won 29% of the vote, compared with just 6% in the 2019 elections. Now, despite these results, the centrist alliance that backed Ursula von der Leyen to become EU Commission president maintained its majority, led by her European People's Party.
We won the European elections. We are by far the strongest party. We are the anchor of stability.
Ursula von der Leyen plans to begin talks with her allies in the Socialist and Democrats and centrist Renew groups on securing their support today.
Meanwhile, in India, Amy, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been sworn into office for a third consecutive term, extending his leadership for another 5 years. That followed a bruising electoral setback that's forced him to share power in India for the first time.
And we're seeing changes in the Israeli government. Benny Gantz, a centrist member of Israel's three-man war cabinet, has announced his resignation, accusing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of mismanaging the war effort. We get more from Bloomberg's Jumana Bersecci.
The symbolism here is he, of course, was one of the more moderate members of the Netanyahu government. And while it doesn't mean that the government itself is going to fall apart, because Netanyahu will still have 64 seats in the Knesset alongside his coalition partners, what it does mean is that he will be more reliant on some of those more right-wing members of the government. One of them, the National Security Minister Ben Gvir, is actually pushing for a position on the war cabinet. He's one of the more hawkish members of the government as it stands and has been adamant that Netanyahu should not be signing on to this Biden ceasefire proposal.
Bloomberg's Jumana Bersecci says Gantz joined Netanyahu's government shortly after the October 7th Hamas attack.
And on the heels of Benny Gantz's resignation, Secretary of State Antony Blinken heads back to the Middle East today in a last-ditch attempt to push a ceasefire deal. President Biden has put the proposal forward as an Israeli one, but both Israel and Hamas have distanced themselves from it. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says the ball is in Hamas's court.
We're waiting for them to communicate to Qatar and Egypt, two of the mediators involved in the hostage negotiations. And we are hopeful that with enough of a chorus of the international community all speaking with one voice, Hamas will get to the right answer.
National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan spoke on ABC's This Week, heard Sundays on Bloomberg Radio. Secretary of State Blinken lands today in Egypt. He'll meet with senior officials, including President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, and then he heads to Israel, where he is expected to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
And then back here in the U.S., Donald Trump will be interviewed today by New York probation officers. They'll submit a sentencing recommendation for the former president. Now, the interview will help determine how much time, if any, Trump will spend behind bars. It will be conducted virtually, Trump at his home in Florida and the probation officers in New York. Trump's sentencing is scheduled for July 11th. After his conviction for falsifying business records, he has vowed to appeal.
Amy, let's turn to markets now. A double dose of macroeconomic catalysts are coming on the same day. On Wednesday, we get a report on consumer prices in the morning. Then that afternoon, the Fed makes an interest rate decision. Mohamed El-Arian, Queens College Cambridge president and Bloomberg opinion columnist, says last Friday's stronger than expected jobs report all but rules out a rate cut this summer.
Look, it's reasonable for a Fed that is overly data dependent. There's no way they can cut or signal a cut in July with this data. They would have to change their reaction function and be public about it, and I don't see the Fed doing this. So that's why the door is shut.
Mohamed El-Arian spoke on Bloomberg last Friday following the May jobs report, and the options market's betting the S&P 500 will move 1.25% in either direction on Wednesday.
And before we get all that economic data, investors are going to hear from Apple. The company is holding its developers conference later today. Bloomberg Intelligence tech analyst Matthew Bloxham says it'll show whether the iPhone maker can become a major player in the burgeoning field of artificial intelligence and whether that can drive sales.
The big focus is really about whether this is going to kickstart a new smartphone supercycle. Obviously, over the last few years, we've seen smartphone sales generally on the slide. And if you look at the way this is being positioned, these AI features that they're going to announce are only going to really be available on the new versions of the phone. So it's going to be, does Apple do enough with these AI features to make people think, actually, I really want to upgrade to get access to these new features?
Bloomberg Intelligence analyst Matthew Bloxham says the announcement will lay out that Apple is a serious player in the AI space. Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Amy. Former President Donald Trump zeroed in on his criminal conviction and prosecutors at a campaign rally in sweltering heat in Las Vegas Sunday afternoon. Trump also denounced Nevada's Democratic senator who is up for re-election.
With your help, we're going to win Nevada. We're going to defeat your Biden-loving radical left Senator Jackie Rosen, who's terrible.
Those who attended the rally had mixed reviews of the former president. These Vegas voters talked about why they support Trump.
The decline in Biden, you're like, man, how can you vote for him? You know, are we better now than we were a few years ago? Probably not. You know, I myself am not, so.
Definitely not.
However, this Vegas voter supported Nikki Haley before she dropped out of the race and is uneasy about seeing the former president back in office.
The denial of fact, scientific fact in the case of COVID, the denial of the election are difficult for me to accept.
Meanwhile, President Joe Biden warned against the rise of isolationism in the U.S. while visiting an American military cemetery in France that Donald Trump skipped 6 years ago. Biden said he could not fathom the idea that I'd come to Normandy and not make the short trip here to pay tribute.
I think it is a measure of a country's support for democratic values, that they honor those who've risked their lives and lost their lives.
Biden said the World War I era cemetery was the final resting place for soldiers who fought in the deadly U.S. Marine Corps battle. The criminal trial of President Joe Biden's son is heading into its final stretch. Hunter Biden's lawyers could call at least one more witness when the case resumes today in Delaware's federal court. Biden himself. He is charged with 3 felonies stemming from the October 2018 purchase of a gun he had for about 11 days. Prosecutors say he lied on a mandatory gun purchase form by saying he was not illegally using or addicted to drugs. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg, Amy.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Time now for our Bloomberg Sports Update, and for that, we bring in John Stashower. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Amy. After Game 1 of the NBA Finals, Dallas coach Jason Kidd said Jaylen Brown was the Celtics' best player. Some perceive that as a slight of Jason Tatum. What's clear, through 2 games, Boston doesn't rely on one player. Big reason they're 14-2 in the playoffs. They're 2 wins from the championship in Boston. Tatum didn't shoot well, 6 of 22, but Brown scored 21 points. Drew Holiday had 26, shooting 11 of 14. Celtics beat the Mavs 105-98 for a 2-0 series lead on ESPN. Holiday praised Tatum.
I think I just got the opportunity. I would say a lot of it was JT. JT was tagging the basket. They were double teaming him. and he was making the right play. I don't know if he had a triple-double, almost, had 9 rebounds, but the way that he played tonight, the way that he led us, getting into the paint, making plays, finding me wide open, it was all about him.
Luka Doncic for Dallas scored 32, had a triple-double, but he only scored 3 points in the fourth quarter, and he had 8 turnovers. First words from Dan Hurley since news of the Lakers pursuing him. He said he's impressed by the Lakers, but loves coaching UConn. Hurley says he'll make his decision today whether to change jobs. At the stadium, Yankees salvaged one with the Dodgers, winning 6-4. Big 3-run homer 6th inning by Trent Grisham, who filled in all weekend for the still injured Juan Soto. Another homer for Aaron Judge, his 24th. He's hit 18 in his last 34 games. In London, Mets didn't take their first lead till the 9th inning, then held on in the bottom of the game-ending double play. They beat the Phillies 6-5. Red Sox back to 500, beat the White Sox in 10 innings. Nationals a 7-run 4th inning to beat Atlanta 8-5, and the Orioles finished a sweep at Tampa Bay 9-2. Grand Slam for Adley Rutschman. 21-year-old Carlos Alcaraz, the youngest to win Grand Slams on 3 different surfaces, took the French Open final with Sasha Zverev coming back from a 2-1 deficit. He had done that in the semifinals as well. Scotty Scheffler won Memorial Golf in Ohio, his 5th win of the year. John Stashauer, Bloomberg Sports.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. It is attack to the right in Europe. Far-right parties have handed massive defeats to German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and French President Emmanuel Macron in European Union elections over the weekend. And now Macron is calling early elections of his own to try to stop the rise of his right-wing rival, perennial rival, Marine Le Pen in France. And for more, we are joined by Bloomberg Daybreak Europe anchor Stephen Carroll, who has been very busy covering the EU elections for us from Brussels. Stephen, good morning. I think we knew going in that centrist parties were vulnerable, but just how much of a surprise was this result for the far right, really sweeping things in Germany and France?
Well, that's what's really interesting, Nathan, about this story is that actually the centre held its majority in the European Parliament. So in a big pan-European picture, not that much change for the parties that have been in power and that are likely to stay in power, or at least being able to nominate a European Commission president and for the next 5 years in the EU. It's the individual country stories where we're seeing those sort of reactions. So you mentioned Germany. The party of Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor in Germany, had its worst performance ever in a European Parliament election. We saw an increase in support for the AfD, the far-right party there, but also a shift to voters back to the CDU, the Christian Democrats, the party formerly of Angela Merkel. So a shift towards the centre-right among voters there as well. The Greens, too, being punished in Germany. The French result is particularly interesting because actually, if you compare it to opinion polls, the score that Emmanuel Macron's party got of just under 15% and the score that Marine Le Pen's party got on the far right of around 32% isn't that far off what polls were predicting either. The surprise was what Emmanuel Macron decided to do about it. He's calling legislative elections that will happen now at the end of this month. There's 2 rounds of voting, so the 30th of June and the 7th of July, giving voters a chance to elect a new national parliament and perhaps setting up one of these really wonderfully French political situations. It's called cohabitation. It's where you get a president from one party and a prime minister from another. He's essentially saying to the electorate, if you want to give the National Rally Party, that party of Marine Le Pen, a chance to govern, here's their chance, knowing full well that he as president is safe in his job and he'll still retain a lion's share of the power.
Yeah, what a fascinating move by the French president. It almost seems like it's becoming a theme in Europe. I mean, we saw Rishi Sunak just a few weeks ago call an early election when his chips were down. I mean, how big a surprise is this that Emmanuel Macron would call the snap election just a few hours after the results came in Brussels?
We're told from our sources in Paris that, in fact, very few people, even within Emmanuel Macron's own circle, knew that this was coming until the last minute. So this was part, obviously, of Emmanuel Macron's strategy. He wanted to also surprise the electorate. If you think about it and take a step back, though, it's perhaps not that surprising because Emmanuel Macron, although his party is the largest in the French parliament, doesn't have a majority. And they've been struggling to get some key measures through the parliament so far. So the idea of throwing it open to an election, it wasn't entirely off the cards before this election, but he's taking a gamble. Some are calling it an audaciously bold step. Some are saying that it's a really big risk for Emmanuel Macron.
Does this put the pressure on Germany's Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, as well to call earlier elections, given the result against his party?
Not quite, because the political system works in a slightly different way in Germany. So actually, pulling this sort of move wouldn't work under the German system because Olaf Scholz would just lose power. Whereas with Emmanuel Macron, because the parliament only has some of the power and most of it lies with the president, Emmanuel Macron can do this knowing that he'll still be able to function as a president, although weakened in his role as head of state. Whereas if Olaf Scholz did the same thing and lost the election, he would be out as chancellor and someone else would get in. So it speaks to the intricacies, the individualities of the European political systems as well. It's worth pointing out that not all incumbents had a bad day. Giorgia Meloni in Italy, her party did extremely well in these European elections, and in Spain, Pedro Sanchez managed to hold on to his level of support for his party. They came second, but when you look at what's happening over the border in France, I think perhaps he could be quite relieved that he came second in these elections.
So just in our last 30 seconds, Stephen, what could these results mean for cohesion in the European Union?
The European Union looks like it will proceed to nominate Ursula von der Leyen as the next European Commission president. That's in the gift of the leaders, then it goes to the Parliament. But on the numbers, they have the numbers in Parliament to be able to pass her as the European Commission president. But as always with European politics, plenty can change between now and then.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Amy Morris. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.